The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Silver Creek as Rebecca Morgan clutched her 5-year-old daughter Emma to her chest, trembling beneath the shadow of the gallows. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and justice was as harsh as the unforgiving desert that surrounded them. "Thief!" bellowed Harold Winters, the rotund owner of the town's only bakery. His face flushed crimson with rage as he pointed a stubby finger at Rebecca. "Sheriff, I want this woman arrested. She stole bread from my shop." Rebecca's gaunt face, once beautiful but now weathered by hardship and hunger, contorted with desperation. "Please, I was going to pay. Emma hasn't eaten in 2 days." Her voice cracked as she stroked her daughter's matted blonde hair. The child's eyes were sunken, her small frame too thin for a child her age. Sheriff Mills sighed heavily, adjusting his worn hat. "Mrs. Morgan, this is the 3rd complaint against you this month. I'm afraid I'm going to have to take you in." The crowd that had gathered seemed to pulse with a mixture of pity and judgment. Rebecca had become a familiar sight in Silver Creek since her husband's death in a mining accident 6 months prior. Once respected as the schoolteacher's wife, she now lived in a ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of town, taking in laundry that barely paid for the roof over their heads. "What about my daughter?" Rebecca pleaded as the sheriff approached with handcuffs. "The orphanage will take her until your hearing," Sheriff Mills replied, his voice softening slightly. "You're looking at 30 days, Rebecca. Maybe more, given your record." Emma began to wail, her small fingers clutching at her mother's threadbare dress. "Mama, don't leave me." Rebecca felt her world collapsing. The orphanage was a grim place children who entered rarely found their way back to their families. Some were sent east on orphan trains, adopted by families looking for farmhands rather than children to love. "Please, there must be another way," she begged, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "The fine's $20, Winters declared triumphantly, knowing full well Rebecca couldn't possibly have such a sum. "Pay it now or go to jail." The crowd murmured. $20 for a loaf of bread was daylight robbery. But Winters had the town council in his pocket, and no one dared challenge him. Just as Sheriff Mills reached for Rebecca's arm, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "I'll pay the fine." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall figure stepped forward. His spurs jingled softly against the hard-packed dirt, and the sun glinted off the silver star pinned to his vest, not a local lawman's badge, but rather that of a ranger. Dust coated his long leather coat, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. "Griffin Stone." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Texas Ranger, passing through on business." His eyes, keen and the color of burnished steel, assessed the situation quickly. Harold Winters puffed up his chest. "This is a local matter, Ranger. We don't need outside interference." Griffin's gaze hardened. $20 for bread seems steep, even in these parts. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. Counting out the money methodically, he placed it in the baker's outstretched hand. "This settles the debt. The lady and her child are free to go." Sheriff Mills looked relieved to be spared making an arrest. "Ranger Stone, while I appreciate your generosity, Mrs. Morgan has a history of trying to feed her child." Griffin interrupted. "I understand desperate times call for desperate measures. Perhaps what's needed isn't jail, but opportunity." Rebecca stared at the ranger, unable to comprehend why a stranger would intervene on her behalf. Emma had quieted, her tear-stained face peering curiously at the tall man who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Griffin turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm staying at the hotel for a few days while I conduct some business. I could use someone to launder my clothes and perhaps mend a tear or two. I'd pay fairly." He spoke matter-of-factly, without condescension or pity. Rebecca straightened her back, dignity returning to her posture. I'd be grateful for the work, Mr. Stone. Winters wasn't satisfied. She'll just steal again. Mark my words. Griffin's voice dropped to a dangerous timbre. The matter is settled, Mr. Winters. Unless you'd like me to inquire about your pricing practices with the territorial governor next time I'm in Prescott. The baker blanched and retreated, muttering under his breath. Come along, Mrs. Morgan, Griffin said, his tone gentler. Let's get you and your daughter something to eat. As they walked toward the hotel, Rebecca felt the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. Some looked relieved, others suspicious. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. But she knew better than to trust it or the mysterious ranger who had appeared like a mirage in the desert. What she didn't know was that Griffin Stone had his own ghosts, his own reasons for understanding the desperation that could drive a person to break the law. And as he watched the young widow walking beside him, her daughter's hand clutched tightly in hers. Something stirred within him that he thought had died years ago. Neither of them realized that this chance encounter on a dusty street would change both their lives forever. The Grand Western Hotel stood 3 stories tall, easily the most imposing structure in Silver Creek. Its painted facade and glass windows spoke of ambitions greater than the town had yet achieved. Inside, the lobby boasted a polished wooden floor and a modest chandelier that seemed out of place in the frontier town. Rebecca hesitated at the entrance, acutely aware of her shabby appearance. Emma pressed against her skirts, wide-eyed at the relative luxury. This way, Griffin said, nodding to the hotel restaurant adjacent to the lobby. They serve a decent stew. The restaurant was half full, mostly with traveling businessmen and a few local merchants. Conversations stuttered to a halt as Rebecca entered, then resumed in hushed tones. The manager approached, his smile faltering as he recognized Rebecca. Mr. Holden, Griffin addressed him before any objection could be voiced. A table for 3, if you please, and bring some milk for the child. Holden's eyes darted to the ranger's badge, then to Rebecca. Of course, sir. Right this way. They were seated at a corner table, and Griffin ordered 3 bowls of beef stew, cornbread, and coffee for the adults. Rebecca sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap, while Emma stared openly at Griffin. Are you a real ranger, mister? Emma asked, her voice small but curious. Griffin's stern expression softened slightly. Yes, miss. For 12 years now. My papa said rangers are the bravest men in Texas, she said solemnly. Your papa sounds like a wise man. Rebecca swallowed hard. He was. Thomas was a mining engineer. He came west to help establish the Silver Creek operation. Her voice faltered. There was a cave in 6 months ago. Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan. The food arrived, and Emma's eyes widened at the steaming bowl placed before her. She looked to her mother for permission. Go ahead, sweetheart, Rebecca said, her heart aching at how such a simple meal could seem like a feast to her daughter. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Rebecca forced herself to eat slowly, though hunger gnawed at her insides. Griffin noticed but pretended not to, allowing her to maintain her dignity. If I may ask, Ranger Stone, what brings you to Silver Creek? Rebecca finally asked, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Griffin took a sip of coffee before answering. I'm tracking a gang that's been robbing payroll shipments between here and Tucson. 3 men, led by a fellow named Jasper Red. They've killed 2 guards already. Rebecca paled slightly. I've heard rumors about robberies, but I didn't know it was so serious. Most outlaws know to steer clear of mining towns. Too many armed men protecting their interests. But Red's not most outlaws. Griffin's jaw tightened. I've been on his trail for 2 months. Emma had finished her stew and was now drowsily leaning against her mother's arm, the fullness of her stomach making her sleepy. "About the work you mentioned," Rebecca said, her voice hesitant. "I really am skilled with laundry and mending. I could have your things ready by tomorrow evening." Griffin nodded. "That would be fine. I have several shirts that need attention, and this coat has seen better days." He paused. "I was also hoping you might know the area well enough to guide me to some of the more remote homesteads. Red and his men might be hiding out, and strangers asking questions tend to put people on edge." Rebecca considered this. "I know most of the families within a day's ride. The women talk when I collect their laundry." She straightened in her chair. "I'd be glad to help, especially after what you did today." "It's not charity, Mrs. Morgan. I'll pay you fairly for your time." "Rebecca," she said softly. "Please call me Rebecca." Griffin nodded once. "Rebecca, then." After they finished eating, Griffin escorted them to the hotel's back entrance where he handed Rebecca a bundle of clothes. "There's $1 now and 4 more when the work is done," he said, placing the coin in her palm. "I'll meet you tomorrow at noon by the livery stable if you're still willing to guide me." Rebecca clutched the $1, knowing it would buy enough food for several days if she was careful. "We'll be there." "Thank you, Ranger Stone." "Griffin," he corrected, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. As Rebecca and Emma made their way home in the fading light, the little girl looked up at her mother. "Is the ranger going to help us, Mama?" Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand. "He already has, sweetheart. More than he knows." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that reminded Rebecca of better times. She rose early, finishing Griffin's laundry before the sun had fully crested the mountains. His shirts were worn but of good quality, and she took extra care with them, pressing them smooth with the heated iron and mending the frayed cuffs with neat, tiny stitches. Emma watched from her pallet, clutching the small rag doll that was her only toy. "Mama, do you like the ranger?" Rebecca paused, the question catching her off guard. "He's been kind to us, Emma. That's all." "He has sad eyes like yours," the child observed with uncanny perception. Rebecca returned to her work, unsettled by her daughter's comment. It was true that Griffin Stone carried a weight about him, visible in the set of his shoulders and the lines around his eyes. But she had no business wondering about a lawman's sorrows. He would move on soon enough, continuing his pursuit of outlaws across the territory, while she remained trapped in Silver Creek with dwindling options. At 11:30, Rebecca and Emma set out for town, Griffin's freshly laundered and mended clothes carefully wrapped in brown paper. As they approached the main street, Rebecca felt the familiar discomfort of being watched and judged. She kept her eyes forward, her hand firmly holding Emma's. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, the smell of hay and horses strong in the air. Griffin was already there, speaking with the stable master while inspecting a sturdy bay gelding. He looked up as they approached, nodding in greeting. "Right on time," he said, taking the package from Rebecca. "I've arranged for 2 horses. I hope you ride." Rebecca nodded. "My father raised horses in Kentucky. I've been riding since I was Emma's age." Griffin seemed pleased with this information. "And the little one?" "Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house has agreed to watch her for the afternoon," Rebecca explained. "She's one of the few in town who's been kind to us." Griffin squatted down to Emma's level. "Is that all right with you, Miss Emma? Your mother and I need to speak with some people who live quite far from town." Emma regarded him seriously. "Are you looking for the bad men?" Griffin's expression remained neutral. "Yes, but you needn't worry. They're far from here, and I wouldn't take your mother anywhere dangerous." This seemed to satisfy the child. "Will you come back for supper? Mama makes good biscuits when we have flour." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Emma, Ranger Stone has his own affairs to attend to. Griffin stood, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. I wouldn't want to impose, but I appreciate the invitation, Miss Emma. After settling Emma with Mrs. Abernathy, a kind-faced widow who ran the boarding house, Rebecca and Griffin rode out of town heading east toward the scattered homesteads that dotted the foothills. Rebecca sat comfortably in the saddle of the gentle mare Griffin had chosen for her, her faded blue riding skirt arranged modestly over her legs. She had once owned a proper riding habit, but it had been sold months ago to pay for medicine when Emma had fallen ill with fever. The closest homestead belongs to the Hendersons, Rebecca explained as they followed a narrow trail through scrubby juniper trees. Jacob Henderson came here 3 years ago with his wife and sons. They keep to themselves mostly, but his wife Martha brings eggs to town every Wednesday. Griffin listened attentively, mentally cataloging the information. Any strangers been seen around their property? Not that I've heard, but the Hendersons have a creek running through their land. It's one of the few reliable water sources in the area. If someone wanted to hide out, it would be a logical place. They rode in companionable silence for a while. The terrain grew rockier as they climbed, offering expansive views of the valley below. Silver Creek looked small and vulnerable from this height, a fragile outpost of civilization in the vast wilderness. You mentioned you're from Kentucky, Griffin said eventually. How did you end up in Arizona territory? Rebecca's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Thomas was brilliant with machines and mining techniques. When the Silver Creek Mining Company offered him a position with triple his Kentucky salary, it seemed like an opportunity we couldn't refuse. Her voice grew softer. We were going to save enough to open a school. I was a teacher back home. Griffin studied her profile, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the way she carried herself despite her circumstances. You could teach here, couldn't you? A bitter smile touched her lips. Silver Creek already has a teacher, the minister's daughter. Besides, few families would send their children to learn from a woman who's been branded a thief. She straightened in the saddle. But that's all in the past now. The Henderson place is just over this ridge. The homestead came into view as they crested the hill, a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, and several fenced areas for livestock. Smoke rose from the chimney, and chickens scratched in the yard. As they approached, a tall man emerged from the barn, a shotgun held casually but visibly in his hands. 2 teenage boys flanked him, each carrying rifles. That's far enough, the man called out. State your business. Griffin raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. Jacob Henderson? I'm Ranger Griffin Stone from Texas. This is Mrs. Rebecca Morgan from town. We're making inquiries about some strangers who might be passing through the area. Henderson lowered his shotgun slightly but remained wary. Mrs. Morgan, I know. What kind of strangers are you looking for? Ranger? Griffin dismounted, motioning for Rebecca to do the same. 3 men, likely armed, led by a man named Jasper Red. They've been robbing payroll shipments and aren't shy about killing. Henderson's expression darkened. Haven't seen anyone fitting that description, but we did have some supplies go missing from our storage shed 2 nights ago. Food, mostly, and a blanket. Griffin's interest sharpened. Mind if I take a look at where they broke in? While the men examined the shed, Martha Henderson invited Rebecca inside for coffee. The cabin was simple but well kept, with handmade curtains and a polished table. It's good to see you, Rebecca, Martha said kindly as she poured the coffee. How's your little girl? Emma's well, thank you. Growing too fast. Rebecca accepted the cup gratefully. Martha glanced out the window at Griffin. The ranger seems like a decent sort. Are you helping him officially? He's paying me as a guide, Rebecca explained, feeling a need to clarify their arrangement. He helped me yesterday when, well, there was trouble in town. Martha's eyes softened with understanding. I heard about what happened at the bakery. Harold Winters is a miserable excuse for a human being, charging those prices. She reached across the table and squeezed Rebecca's hand. Don't you pay any mind to the gossips. Most folks understand you're just trying to survive. Rebecca blinked back unexpected tears at the woman's kindness. Thank you, Martha. Their conversation was interrupted when Griffin and Jacob returned to the cabin. Griffin's expression was grim. Whoever took your supplies headed north, toward the old McCready mine, he said. Would you have any objection if Mrs. Morgan and I tracked them a ways? Jacob shook his head. Not at all. But be careful, Ranger. That mine was abandoned for good reason. The tunnels are unstable, and there's still some old dynamite up there if I recall correctly. Griffin nodded his thanks, and soon he and Rebecca were back in their saddles, following faint tracks that led toward the foothills. Do you think it's them? Rebecca asked as they rode. Could be, Griffin replied. Or it could be drifters passing through. Either way, I need to check. The terrain became increasingly difficult as they followed the trail. Griffin dismounted frequently to examine signs that Rebecca couldn't see a broken twig here, a displaced stone there. His tracking skills impressed her, though she tried not to show it. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the abandoned mine. The entrance gaped like a dark wound in the hillside, the rotting timbers of the support structure a warning to all who approached. A weather-beaten sign declared, "Danger, keep out," in faded letters. We should turn back, Rebecca said, a feeling of foreboding creeping up her spine. This place isn't safe. Griffin surveyed the area carefully. The tracks lead inside, but there are no horses. If it's Red and his men, they've hidden their mounts elsewhere. He turned to Rebecca. You're right, though. You should wait here. I'll just take a quick look. Rebecca dismounted and tied both horses to a scrub oak. No, I'm coming with you. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and I won't go far into the mine. Griffin looked like he wanted to argue, but instead handed her a small derringer from his boot. Keep this just in case. You know how to use it. Rebecca took the gun with steady hands. My father taught me. I haven't fired one in years, but I remember the principles. They approached the mine entrance cautiously. Griffin drew his revolver, holding it ready as they stepped into the shadowy interior. The temperature dropped immediately, and Rebecca shivered despite the warm day outside. The main tunnel extended about 30 feet before branching in 2 directions. Evidence of recent activity was clear scuff marks in the dust, a discarded tin can, and most tellingly, the remains of a small fire. Someone's definitely been here, Griffin whispered. Recently, too. Rebecca nodded, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering from the entrance. The left tunnel leads to the main excavation chamber, if I remember Thomas's descriptions correctly. The right one goes deeper, to where they were following a new vein before the cave-in. Griffin hesitated, then pointed to the right tunnel. Wait here. I'm gonna check just a little ways down. If you hear anything suspicious, get back to the horses immediately. Rebecca positioned herself where she could see both the entrance and Griffin as he moved cautiously down the right tunnel. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she gripped the small derringer tightly. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught her attention, the distinctive sound of a horse nickering. Their mounts were responding to something or someone. Griffin, she called softly, moving toward the entrance. Before she could reach it, a silhouette appeared, blocking the light. A man's voice, rough and amused, cut through the stillness. Well, what have we here? A lady in a mine? That's a sight you don't see every day. Rebecca raised the derringer instinctively as a tall man with a scarred face stepped into the mine, his own gun already drawn and pointed at her chest. Now, that's not very neighborly, he drawled. Why don't you put that little pea-shooter down before you hurt yourself? Rebecca's mind raced. This had to be one of Red's men. Griffin was still in the side tunnel, possibly out of earshot. She needed to warn him somehow. I'm just looking for my husband, she improvised, keeping her voice steady. He's a mining engineer, checking the stability of the tunnels. The man chuckled. Is that so? Funny, because we've been using this place for 3 days, and I ain't seen no engineer. He gestured with his gun. Move back, lady. Nice and slow. Rebecca took a deliberate step backward, then another, trying to angle toward the right tunnel where Griffin had disappeared. As she moved, she deliberately scuffed her boot loudly against the rocky floor. Who else is with you? The outlaw demanded, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. No one, Rebecca lied. I rode up alone. Then whose horse is that bay gelding tied up with yours? His finger tightened on the trigger. I don't like being lied to, lady. Just then, the sound of a gun being cocked echoed in the tunnel. Griffin's voice, hard as steel, came from behind Rebecca. Drop it, Cole. You're covered. The outlaw's eyes widened in recognition. Stone? Is that you? His face contorted with rage. You're a long way from Texas, Ranger. Griffin stepped forward, keeping Rebecca partially behind him. His revolver was aimed steadily at the outlaw's chest. I said drop it. You know I won't ask again. For a tense moment, Rebecca thought the man Cole would risk a shot. Then, with a curse, he lowered his gun to the ground. Kick it over here, Griffin ordered. Cole complied, then raised his hands. Red's gonna skin you alive when he finds out you're here. Where is he? Griffin demanded. A slow smile spread across Cole's face. Closer than you think. As if on cue, a gunshot exploded from outside the mine, followed by the sound of panicked horses. Rebecca gasped as dust and small stones shook loose from the ceiling. That'll be the boss now, Cole said, his smile widening to a grin. Sounds like your horses just took off, Stone. It's a long walk back to town. Griffin's expression didn't change, but Rebecca could sense his calculation of their suddenly worsened situation. Rebecca, pick up his gun. She bent down quickly, retrieving the outlaw's revolver while keeping the derringer trained on him. Griffin's next words were interrupted by a booming voice from the mine entrance. Cole, you alive in there? Got company, Jasper. Cole called back. It's that Texas Ranger that's been dogging us, and he's got a woman with him. Rebecca felt her blood run cold as a second man appeared at the entrance, taller and broader than Cole, with a thick beard and cold eyes that assessed the situation instantly. Ranger Stone, the newcomer said, his voice deceptively conversational. You're becoming a real nuisance. Jasper Red, Griffin acknowledged, his aim unwavering. You're under arrest for the murders of Samuel Porter and William Jenkins, and for the robbery of payroll shipments from the Wells Fargo office in Tucson. Red laughed, the sound echoing eerily in the mine shaft. I don't see a posse with you, Ranger. Just a woman. His gaze shifted to Rebecca, making her skin crawl. A pretty one. I'll grant you that. She's not part of this, Griffin said. Let her go, and we can settle this between us. That's mighty chivalrous, Red mocked, taking a step forward. But I don't think so. See, now that you've found our little hideout, we're gonna have to relocate. And that's inconvenient. Rebecca sensed movement behind her and realized with horror that there must be a third man coming through one of the other tunnels. They were surrounded. Griffin sensed it too. In one fluid motion, he spun around, firing at a shadow emerging from the left tunnel. A man cried out, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled against the wall. In that moment of distraction, Red lunged forward. Rebecca screamed a warning, but it came too late. The outlaw leader crashed into Griffin, driving him backward. Both men fell heavily to the ground, Griffin's gun skittering away into the darkness. "Run!" Griffin shouted to Rebecca as he grappled with Red. Instead, she raised Cole's revolver and fired at the wounded outlaw who was raising his own weapon again. Her shot went wide, but it forced him to duck back into the tunnel. Cole seized the opportunity to rush her, knocking the gun from her hand and grabbing her roughly by the arm. "Drop that little gun too, or I'll break your pretty neck," he growled. Rebecca had no choice but to release the derringer. On the ground, Griffin and Red continued to struggle, trading vicious blows. Griffin was skilled, but Red had the advantage of weight and position. "Enough!" Red finally bellowed, pinning Griffin with a knee to his chest and pressing a knife to his throat. "One more move and you're dead." Griffin went still, his breathing ragged, a trickle of blood running from his split lip. His eyes sought Rebecca's, filled with regret. "Tie them up," Red ordered Cole. "We're moving out tonight. Can't risk the lady's absence being noticed in town." As Cole bound her wrists with rough rope, Rebecca's mind raced desperately for a way out. She had led Griffin into this trap, however unwittingly, and now they were both at the mercy of killers. The afternoon sun slanted through the mine entrance, reminding her that Emma would be waiting, expecting her mother's return. The thought of her daughter gave her courage. Somehow, she had to find a way to escape not just for her own sake, but for Emma's, and for the man who had risked everything to help a desperate woman accused of stealing bread. Night had fallen by the time the outlaws finished their preparations to move. Rebecca sat against the mine wall, her hands bound before her, watching as Red and his men gathered their meager possessions. Griffin was similarly bound beside her, though they had used far more rope on him and had taken the additional precaution of shackling his ankles with iron chains they'd found in the abandoned mine. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, noticing how he winced when he shifted position. "I've had worse," he replied grimly. "Are you all right? Did they harm you?" She shook her head. "No, but I'm worried about Emma. She'll be frightened if I don't return." Griffin's expression softened momentarily. "Mrs. Abernathy seems like a good woman. She'll look after her until we figure a way out of this." Rebecca appreciated his attempt at optimism, but the reality of their situation was dire. Red had made it clear they were valuable only as hostages to ensure safe passage out of the territory. After that, their usefulness would end. "I'm sorry I got you into this," she said, her voice barely audible. Griffin's eyes met hers in the dim light of the outlaw's lantern. "You didn't. This is my job, Rebecca. If anything, I'm the one who put you in danger." Their whispered conversation was interrupted by Red approaching with a canteen. He unscrewed the cap and held it to Rebecca's lips first. "Drink," he commanded. "We've got a long ride ahead, and I don't want you fainting on me." Rebecca hesitated, then took several grateful swallows of the lukewarm water. Red then offered the canteen to Griffin, who regarded him with cold hostility. "Don't be proud, Ranger," Red said with a cruel smile. "Dying of thirst won't help your lady friend here." Griffin finally drank, his eyes never leaving Red's face. "She's not my lady friend. She's just a guide I hired in town." Red chuckled. "Is that so? Then you won't mind if Cole takes a special interest in her once we're clear of the territory." He glanced over at his lieutenant, who was watching Rebecca with undisguised lust. Griffin's jaw tightened visibly. "Touch her, and I'll kill you both." "Bold words for a man in chains," Red observed, but something in Griffin's tone made him step back. "Get them on their feet," he ordered Cole. "Mitch has brought the horses around." Rebecca was roughly pulled to her feet. Outside the mine, she saw that night had indeed fallen, the landscape silvered by a 3/4 moon. 5 horses waited, including Griffin's bay gelding. The third outlaw, Mitch, was mounting up, his wounded shoulder awkwardly bandaged. "The lady rides with me," Red announced, dragging Rebecca toward his horse. "Stone rides with Cole. And remember, Ranger, one wrong move and she dies first." Rebecca was hoisted unceremoniously onto Red's horse, and he mounted behind her, one arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The closeness of his body made her skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Griffin was similarly situated on Cole's horse, though with considerably less care. His bound hands made it difficult for him to keep his balance, and Rebecca could tell by his rigid posture that the arrangement was painful for his injured ribs. They set off at a steady pace, heading north toward the territorial border. Rebecca tried to memorize landmarks in the moonlight, knowing that if they somehow escaped, finding their way back would be crucial. But the landscape was unfamiliar, a maze of rocky outcroppings and scrubby vegetation that all looked the same in the silver half-light. After riding for what seemed like hours, Red finally called a halt in a small canyon. A stream trickled nearby, providing water for the horses. "We'll rest here for an hour," he announced. "Cole, you take first watch. Mitch needs to rest that shoulder if he's going to be any use to us." Rebecca was pulled from the horse and deposited roughly on the ground. Griffin was similarly dismounted, though Cole seemed to take pleasure in making the process as painful as possible. Once the outlaws had secured the horses and established a small camp without risking a fire that might be spotted, Red approached his prisoners again. He squatted down in front of Griffin, his expression curious. "You know, Stone, I've been wondering, what brought you all the way from Texas to track us? This isn't even your jurisdiction." Griffin met his gaze steadily. "You killed a Texas Ranger in El Paso before you moved on to Arizona. Bill Carver. He was my partner." Understanding dawned on Red's face. "Ah, so it's personal. That explains the determination." He glanced at Rebecca. "And what's your story, pretty lady? How does a refined woman like yourself end up in a backwater like Silver Creek?" Rebecca remained silent, turning her face away. "She's a widow," Griffin answered for her. "Her husband was killed in a mining accident. She was just trying to make a living." Red reached out and turned Rebecca's face back toward him, his fingers rough against her chin. "A widow, eh? That's convenient." Rebecca jerked away from his touch. "There's nothing convenient about it," she said coldly. Red laughed. "She's got spirit. I'll give her that." He stood up. "Get some rest while you can. We ride again in an hour." As Red moved away to check on Mitch, Rebecca shifted closer to Griffin. "What are our chances?" she whispered. Griffin surveyed their situation with a critical eye. "Not good at the moment, but Red's overconfident, and Mitch is injured. If they get careless, we might find an opening. And if we don't?" He looked at her directly, his expression grave but determined. "Then I'll make one." Rebecca believed him. Despite their dire circumstances, she felt safer with Griffin nearby than she would have alone. There was something unshakable about him, a core of integrity that even Red seemed to recognize and respect, however grudgingly. "Your partner," she said softly. "I'm sorry about what happened to him." Griffin's eyes clouded with memory. "Bill and I rode together for 5 years. He had a wife and 2 boys in Austin." His voice hardened. "Red shot him in the back while he was helping a wounded bank teller." The personal nature of Griffin's pursuit suddenly made sense to Rebecca. This wasn't just about upholding the law. It was about justice for a fallen friend. "How did you end up a ranger?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to keep their minds engaged while they looked for an opportunity. A ghost of a smile touched Griffin's lips. "My father was a ranger before me. I grew up hearing his stories, watching him ride out to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." He shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position with his bound hands. "When the war ended, it seemed like the right path. Something honorable in a time when honor was in short supply. Rebecca nodded, understanding. My father wanted me to marry a banker in Louisville. Safe, respectable, secure. But Thomas showed me there was a whole world beyond Kentucky's borders. Her voice softened with memory. He had such dreams for us here. A new start. A chance to build something lasting. And now? Griffin asked gently. Rebecca's eyes glistened in the moonlight. Now I just want Emma to have a chance at a decent life. Everything else is secondary. Their conversation was interrupted by Cole approaching. Keep quiet, or I'll gag you both, he threatened, prodding Griffin roughly with his boot. They fell silent, but something had changed between them, a deeper understanding. A connection forged in shared danger and revealed vulnerabilities. Rebecca found herself drawing strength from Griffin's steady presence, and he seemed to gain focus from her quiet resilience. As the outlaws prepared to move out again, Rebecca caught Griffin's eye and saw in his expression that he was watching, waiting, ready to seize any opportunity that presented itself. She nodded almost imperceptibly, letting him know she would be ready too. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, they would face it together. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn when disaster struck. They had been traveling through increasingly rough terrain, the horses picking their way carefully along a narrow trail that skirted a steep ravine. Mitch was leading, followed by Cole with Griffin, then Red with Rebecca, when Mitch's horse suddenly shied at a rattlesnake coiled on the path. The wounded outlaw, already struggling to control his mount one-handed, was thrown as the horse reared in panic. He tumbled backward, colliding with Cole's horse, which lurched sideways toward the ravine edge. "Hold on!" Cole shouted, dropping the reins to grab at the saddle horn. Griffin seized the moment of chaos. Using his bound hands like a club, he smashed them into Cole's face, feeling the outlaw's nose crunch under the impact. As Cole reeled in pain, Griffin threw his weight sideways, toppling them both from the horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling dangerously close to the ravine edge. Griffin's shackled ankles severely limited his mobility, but adrenaline and training compensated as he fought to subdue Cole. Behind them, Rebecca heard Red curse as he drew his gun. Without hesitation, she threw herself backward, driving her elbow into his stomach. Caught by surprise, his grip on her loosened, and she slid from the horse, landing awkwardly but managing to stay on her feet. "Run!" Griffin shouted to her as he grappled with Cole, both men precariously close to the edge. Rebecca hesitated, torn between escape and helping Griffin. That moment of indecision cost her as Red recovered and leveled his gun at her. "Don't move," he growled, his face contorted with rage. A gunshot cracked through the dawn air, but it wasn't from Red's weapon. Mitch, having recovered his footing, had fired at Griffin. The bullet struck rock inches from where Griffin and Cole struggled, sending stone fragments flying. What happened next seemed to unfold in horrifying slow motion. As Cole tried to regain his feet, his boot slipped on loose gravel. He grabbed desperately for purchase, his fingers closing around Griffin's shirt. For a heartbeat, they teetered on the brink, then gravity claimed them both, and they disappeared over the edge. "Griffin!" Rebecca screamed, lunging toward the ravine only to be caught roughly by Red. "Fool!" he snarled, dragging her back. "You want to join them?" Rebecca fought against his grip, tears blurring her vision. "Let me go. He could be alive down there." Red shoved her to the ground and peered over the edge. The ravine dropped nearly 60 feet to a rocky streambed below. There was no sign of movement. "Cole, you alive?" Red called down. Only silence answered. Mitch limped to Red's side, his face pale from pain and shock. "Jesus, Jasper." They both went over. Red's expression was thunderous. "The Ranger's finally out of our hair, at least." He turned to Rebecca, who was staring at the ravine edge in shock. "Looks like you're on your own now, lady." Rebecca barely heard him. Her mind was filled with the image of Griffin disappearing over that edge. After everything he had done for her and Emma, after all he had survived, to die like this seemed impossibly cruel. Red hauled her to her feet. Change of plans. With Cole gone and Mitch barely able to stay in the saddle, we need to find somewhere to hole up. He looked around, orienting himself. There's an old line shack about 3 miles north of here. We'll head there. As Red forced her back onto his horse, Rebecca's grief gave way to a cold determination. Griffin had sacrificed himself trying to create an opportunity for her escape. She wouldn't waste that sacrifice. Somehow, she would find a way to get back to Emma and to alert the authorities about Red's location. The line shack was even more decrepit than Rebecca had imagined, a single room with a sagging roof, abandoned years ago by whatever ranching operation had built it. Inside was a rusty iron stove, a rickety table, and a rope-strung cot with a moldering mattress. Red secured Rebecca to a support post with rope, then helped Mitch onto the cot. The wounded outlaw was feverish, his injured shoulder inflamed and oozing despite the bandages. "He needs a doctor," Rebecca said, watching as Mitch shivered uncontrollably. "He needs to stop whining and tough it out," Red replied callously, though concern flickered in his eyes as he examined his companion's wound. "It's not like we can ride into town for medical attention." Rebecca saw an opportunity. "I know basic nursing. My husband was a mining engineer. Accidents were common. If you untie me, I could help him." Red regarded her suspiciously. "Why would you help the man who shot at your ranger friend?" "Because I don't want to watch anyone die if I can prevent it," she answered honestly. "And because a dead body will bring buzzards, which will bring attention we don't want." Red considered this, then nodded. "Try anything, and I'll shoot you where you stand." "Understood." Rebecca nodded. Once untied, she immediately went to Mitch's side, examining the wound with clinical detachment. "The bullet's still in there. It needs to come out or infection will spread." "Can you get it?" Red asked. "I can try, but I'll need hot water, clean cloth, and something to use as forceps." She looked around the squalid cabin. "And something strong, whiskey or moonshine, both to clean the wound and for him to drink." Red produced a flask from his saddlebag. "Whiskey I've got. The rest we'll have to improvise." For the next hour, Rebecca worked methodically to extract the bullet from Mitch's shoulder using a knife and hairpin that Red had sterilized in the flame of a candle. The outlaw passed out from the pain early in the procedure, which was a blessing. By the time she had removed the bullet, cleaned the wound as best she could, and re-bandaged it with strips torn from a relatively clean shirt, she was exhausted. "He'll need to rest," she told Red, washing blood from her hands with the remaining hot water, "and pray that infection doesn't set in." Red nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "You've got steady hands." Rebecca said nothing, retreating to the far side of the cabin. Her thoughts kept returning to Griffin. Had he somehow survived the fall? Or was his body lying broken on the rocks below, all because he tried to help her escape? As the day wore on, Red alternated between pacing the small cabin and checking on Mitch, whose condition remained stable but precarious. Rebecca found herself dozing, emotional and physical exhaustion taking their toll. She was jolted awake by Red's curse. Outside, the sound of approaching horses echoed in the stillness. "Get up," Red hissed, grabbing her arm and pressing his gun to her side. Not a sound. He dragged her to the cabin's single window, peering out cautiously. 3 riders were approaching, not lawmen, from their appearance, but rough-looking men who might be miners or cowboys. "Friends of yours," Rebecca whispered. Red shook his head. "Never seen them before." He considered his options. "If they're just passing through, we'll let them go." if they try to stop here. He left the threat unspoken, but Rebecca understood. More deaths on his conscience wouldn't trouble Jasper Red. The riders drew closer, then stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. They seemed to be discussing something, gesturing toward the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. "Damn it," Red muttered. "They've spotted us." One of the men called out, "Hello, the cabin. Anyone home?" Red pressed the gun harder into Rebecca's side. "Call back. Tell them you're alone. Just passing through." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Hello," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who's there?" "Just some weary travelers," came the response. "Hoping to share your fire for a spell." There was something familiar about the voice that made Rebecca's heart skip a beat, but she couldn't place it. Red pushed her toward the door. "Tell them they're welcome, but be careful what you say next." Rebecca opened the door a crack, keeping her body shielded behind it as Red had instructed. The three riders had moved closer, still mounted, their features shadowed by their hats. "I'm afraid I don't have much to offer," she called out. "But you're welcome to rest here." The lead rider urged his horse forward a few more steps, then raised his head. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. It was Griffin. His face was bruised and bloodied, a deep cut across his cheekbone, but he was unmistakably alive. Flanking him were two men she didn't recognize, both heavily armed. Red realized the deception a moment too late. As he moved to grab Rebecca, Griffin's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Jasper Red, you're surrounded. Throw down your weapon and release Mrs. Morgan." Red yanked Rebecca against him, using her as a shield as he backed into the cabin. "Come any closer, Stone, and she dies." Griffin's expression remained impassive, but his eyes burned with intensity as they met Rebecca's. "Are you all right?" he called to her. "Yes," she managed, though Red's arm was crushing her throat. "How the hell are you still alive?" Red demanded, his voice betraying his shock. "Sorry to disappoint you," Griffin replied coolly. "Cole broke my fall. He wasn't as lucky." Red's grip tightened as he processed this information. Rebecca could feel his panic rising as he realized he was trapped. Behind them, Mitch stirred on the cot, reaching weakly for his gun. "Put it down, Mitch," Griffin ordered. "You need a doctor, not a coffin." The wounded outlaw hesitated, then let his hand fall back to his side, too weak to resist. "What'll it be, Red?" Griffin asked. "There's no way out of this. Even if you kill Mrs. Morgan, you won't make it 10 feet. Is that how you want to end shot down like a rabid dog?" Rebecca felt Red's resolve wavering. "You're lying about being surrounded," he accused. "It's just you and those two." Griffin smiled grimly. "Sheriff Mills and 6 deputies are positioned in the rocks behind the cabin. I tracked you here while they circled around. Test me if you want." Rebecca held her breath. She had no idea if Griffin was bluffing, but his confidence was absolute. Long seconds ticked by. Then, with a savage curse, Red shoved Rebecca forward and dropped his gun. "Fine. You win, Ranger." Griffin dismounted swiftly, catching Rebecca as she stumbled toward him. His arm around her waist was gentle but secure as he moved her behind him, drawing his revolver with his free hand. "On your knees, hands behind your head," he ordered Red. As the outlaw complied, the two men with Griffin entered the cabin to secure both prisoners. Only then did Rebecca realize that Griffin's backup consisted of Jacob Henderson and his oldest son. "There's no sheriff, is there?" she asked quietly. Griffin glanced down at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Not within 20 miles. But Red didn't need to know that. The relief of safety, combined with the shock of seeing Griffin alive when she'd believed him dead, overwhelmed Rebecca. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Griffin hadn't caught her. Easy, he murmured, supporting her weight effortlessly despite his own injuries. It's over now. You're safe. Rebecca found herself clinging to him, her face pressed against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart as proof that he was truly alive. Griffin's arm tightened around her, his cheek resting briefly against her hair in a gesture that felt both protective and tender. "How did you survive?" she asked when she could finally speak again. Griffin led her outside, away from Red's glaring presence. "Like I said, Cole broke my fall. We landed on a ledge about 20 feet down. He died on impact, but I was luckier." He gestured to his various injuries with a grimace that was almost a smile. "Relatively speaking. And Mr. Henderson? How did you find him?" "After I climbed out of the ravine, I knew I needed help. The Henderson place was closest, and Jacob's a good man." Griffin's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I'm sorry I put you in such danger. If anything had happened to you—" "Don't," she interrupted, touching his arm. "You risked everything to save me, and now Emma will still have her mother." Her voice caught on her daughter's name. "Emma, she must be so frightened. How long have we been gone?" "Nearly 2 days," Griffin replied. "But don't worry. I sent Jacob's younger son to Silver Creek with a message for Mrs. Abernathy, explaining that you were helping me with an urgent matter and would return soon." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched Rebecca deeply. Even in the midst of pursuing dangerous outlaws, Griffin had considered her daughter's well-being. As Jacob and his son secured the prisoners to their horses for the journey back to town, Griffin turned to Rebecca with an expression she couldn't quite read. "When we get back to Silver Creek," he said carefully, "I'll need to testify against Red and arrange for his transfer to Texas. But after that—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "After that, I thought I might stay on a while, if that wouldn't be unwelcome." Rebecca felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to recognize it as hope. "It wouldn't be unwelcome at all," she replied softly. "In fact, I believe Emma still has her heart set on you joining us for supper." Griffin's smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship and solitude. "I'd like that very much," he said, and offered her his hand to help her mount. As they rode back toward Silver Creek, Rebecca found herself contemplating a future that, for the first time since Thomas's death, held possibilities beyond mere survival. The man riding beside her had not only saved her from immediate danger, but had somehow begun to free her spirit from the prison of grief and desperation that had confined it for so long. The journey back to Silver Creek took most of the day, their pace slowed by the need to accommodate Mitch's injuries and keep a close watch on Red. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Word of their approach spread quickly. By the time they reached the main street, a crowd had gathered, including Sheriff Mills, who looked both astonished and relieved to see Griffin alive and Red in custody. "Ranger Stone, we'd given you up for lost," the sheriff exclaimed, hurrying forward to help with the prisoners. Griffin dismounted stiffly, his injuries clearly paining him after the long ride. "Nearly was, Sheriff. But Mrs. Morgan and the Hendersons helped me track down Red and his remaining man." Mills glanced at Rebecca with newfound respect as she too dismounted. "Is that so? Well, Mrs. Morgan, it seems we owe you an apology for recent misunderstandings." Rebecca nodded acknowledgement but was distracted by a small figure pushing through the crowd. "Mama!" Emma cried, running toward her with arms outstretched. Rebecca knelt to catch her daughter, holding her tightly as emotion overwhelmed her. "Oh, my sweet girl, I've missed you so much." Emma clung to her mother, then looked up at Griffin with wide, solemn eyes. "You brought my mama back, just like you promised." Griffin looked startled. "Did I make that promise?" Emma nodded seriously. Mrs. Abernathy said the ranger sent a message that you and Mama were helping catch bad men, and that you'd bring her home safe. Griffin knelt down to Emma's level, wincing slightly at the movement. Well, Miss Emma, your Mama was very brave. She helped me more than I helped her. The child studied him gravely, then reached out to touch the cut on his cheekbone. You're hurt. Just a scratch, he assured her with a gentle smile. Sheriff Mills cleared his throat. Ranger, we should get these prisoners secured. And Dr. Wilson should take a look at that scratch and your other injuries. Griffin nodded and rose to his feet. I'll be along shortly, Sheriff. Mrs. Morgan, may I escort you and Emma home first? Rebecca hesitated, looking down at her dirty, torn clothing and disheveled appearance. I'm hardly presentable for company. Griffin's eyes held hers with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. You've never looked finer to me than you do right now. As they walked through town toward Rebecca's small cabin, Emma skipping ahead, Griffin spoke quietly. I meant what I said earlier. I'd like to stay in Silver Creek for a while, if that's all right with you. Rebecca glanced up at him. What about Texas? Your duties as a ranger? I've been tracking Red for months, Griffin explained. Once he's tried and sentenced, my assignment is complete. I have accumulated leave I can take while I consider my options. There was something in his tone that made Rebecca's heart beat faster. What options are you considering, Ranger Stone? Griffin stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his expression was earnest and unguarded. I've spent 12 years chasing outlaws across the frontier. That's a long time to be alone, to have no place that feels like home. He took a deep breath. Meeting you and Emma, it's made me wonder if there might be another kind of life waiting, if I'm brave enough to reach for it. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Griffin, Mama, Mr. Stone, come see. Emma called from ahead, interrupting the moment. They hurried to catch up with the child, who was standing in front of Rebecca's cabin with a look of confusion. The door stood open, and light spilled from within. Stay back, Griffin ordered, drawing his gun and moving protectively in front of Rebecca and Emma. But as they approached cautiously, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Abernathy, holding a broom. There you are, she exclaimed. I was beginning to worry you'd be late for supper. Rebecca stared in confusion as Griffin holstered his weapon. Supper. Mrs. Abernathy beckoned them inside. When the Henderson boy brought word that you were helping the ranger on important business, Emma and I thought you might appreciate coming home to a proper meal. The interior of Rebecca's humble cabin had been transformed. The floors were swept clean, fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the table, and the mouth-watering aroma of beef stew filled the air. A fire crackled merrily in the small hearth, and Rebecca's meager belongings had been tidied and arranged with care. Mrs. Abernathy, this is too much, Rebecca protested, even as emotion threatened to overwhelm her. The older woman waved away her objections. Nonsense. This town hasn't treated you fairly since Thomas passed. It's time that changed. She looked pointedly at Griffin. Besides, heroes deserve a proper welcome, don't they, Emma? Emma nodded enthusiastically. I helped make biscuits, she announced proudly. Griffin laughed, a rich, warm sound that Rebecca realized she'd never heard from him before. Well, I did promise your mother I wouldn't miss those biscuits for the world. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on serving them before taking her leave, promising to return in the morning to check on them. As the door closed behind her, Rebecca found herself alone with Griffin and Emma, sharing a meal at her own table for the first time since Thomas's death. The simple domesticity of the scene, Emma chattering about her adventures with Mrs. Abernathy, Griffin listening attentively and asking questions that made the child beam with importance, created an ache of longing in Rebecca's heart that was both painful and sweet. After supper, when Emma had been tucked into bed and fallen asleep almost instantly, Rebecca and Griffin sat by the fire, each cradling a cup of coffee. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly, "for everything you've done for us." Griffin shook his head. "I should be thanking you. Your courage these past days has been remarkable." Rebecca looked down at her cup. "It wasn't courage. It was necessity. When you have a child depending on you, you find strength you never knew you had." "Is that why you took the bread?" Griffin asked gently. "Necessity." Rebecca's hands tightened around her cup. "Yes, we hadn't eaten in 2 days. The laundry money barely covered rent, and Winters had raised his prices again." She looked up, meeting Griffin's gaze directly. "I'm not proud of what I did, but I would do it again to keep Emma from starving." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Griffin said firmly. "The shame belongs to a town that would let a widow and child go hungry while charging $20 for a loaf of bread." Rebecca was silent for a moment, then asked the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. "Why did you help us that day? You didn't know me. You could have just ridden on." Griffin set his coffee aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "My mother was widowed young, like you. There was a drought and our small farm was failing. She went into town to beg for credit at the general store." His jaw tightened at the memory. The owner not only refused but humiliated her in front of half the town. On the way home, she collapsed from exhaustion and hunger. If a passing stranger hadn't found her and brought her home, my brother and I might have lost her too. Rebecca reached out impulsively and laid her hand over his. "I'm sorry." Griffin turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "When I saw you and Emma in the street, I saw my mother and myself all those years ago. I couldn't ride past." The firelight cast a golden glow over his features, softening the hard lines of his face. Rebecca was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the gentle strength in his hand holding hers, of the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. "What happens now?" she whispered. Griffin's thumb traced a gentle pattern across her knuckles. "That depends on you, Rebecca. I meant what I said about staying in Silver Creek, but only if you want me to." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "What about your life in Texas?" "There's nothing waiting for me there except more outlaws to chase," he replied honestly. "I've been thinking about hanging up my badge for a while now. Finding a place to put down roots." "In Silver Creek." Rebecca couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "It's hardly the most welcoming town." Griffin's lips curved in a smile. "It has its charms, and it's growing. The mine is bringing in new families every month. A town like this needs good people to help shape it." He paused, then added quietly, "It needs a proper school, too." Rebecca caught her breath as she realized what he was suggesting. "You think I could teach again?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," Griffin replied with conviction. "And I'd like to help, if you'll let me." The hope that had been a small flame in Rebecca's heart since their return blazed brighter. "Emma has grown quite fond of you," she said softly. Griffin's expression grew tender. "The feeling is mutual. She's a remarkable child, brave and bright, just like her mother." Rebecca felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "Griffin, I don't want your pity." "Pity?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Rebecca, what I feel for you is the furthest thing from pity." He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "I admire your strength, your determination to protect Emma at any cost. I admire the dignity you've maintained despite this town's treatment of you. And I—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, wondering if you're safe, if you're happy. That's not pity. It's something much more significant." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "Griffin, we've only known each other a few days. Sometimes a few days is all it takes to recognize what matters, he replied simply. I'm not asking for promises, Rebecca. Just a chance to see where this might lead. Rebecca looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and a warmth that made her feel truly seen for the first time since Thomas's death. Slowly, she nodded. I'd like that too. The smile that spread across Griffin's face made him look years younger. Gently, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Then we'll take it one day at a time. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and transformation. Griffin stayed at the hotel in town while Red awaited transfer to Texas for trial. In his official capacity, Griffin worked with Sheriff Mills to process the outlaw, but every free moment was spent with Rebecca and Emma. Word of Griffin's capture of the notorious Jasper Red spread throughout the territory, as did the story of Rebecca's role in his apprehension. Gradually, the town's attitude toward her shifted from suspicion to respect. Harold Winters still scowled when she passed his bakery, but others in town began to nod in greeting, to smile at Emma, to offer Rebecca small kindnesses that had been withheld since Thomas's death. Griffin encouraged Rebecca to speak with Reverend Porter about establishing a school. To her surprise, the minister was receptive to the idea, especially when Griffin offered to help secure funding through his connections with the territorial government. We have at least 20 children of school age in Silver Creek now, Reverend Porter admitted. My daughter has done her best, but she's not a trained teacher. If you're willing to take on the responsibility, Mrs. Morgan, I believe the town council would support the initiative. By the end of the month, plans were underway to convert an unused storeroom behind the church into a schoolroom. Griffin spent hours helping with the renovations, building desks and benches alongside other men from town who had come to respect the Texas Rangers' quiet strength and unwavering integrity. Emma blossomed under the renewed stability in her life. She followed Griffin like a shadow whenever he visited, peppering him with questions about Texas, about being a ranger, about the horses he'd ridden and the places he'd seen. He answered with patient good humor, sometimes embellishing his tales to make her laugh, other times sharing simple truths about life on the frontier. Rebecca watched their growing bond with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Emma had lost her father so young. She feared what would happen if the child became too attached to Griffin, only to have him leave when his business in Silver Creek was concluded. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant hues, Rebecca voiced her concerns. Emma adores you, she said, watching her daughter chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. I worry about how she'll handle it when you return to Texas. Griffin was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, handing it to Rebecca. What's this? She asked, unfolding it carefully. My resignation from the Texas Rangers, he replied quietly. I sent it to Austin last week. It's official now. Rebecca stared at him in shock. Griffin, you didn't have to. I wanted to, he interrupted gently. Rebecca, these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Being with you and Emma, helping build something here in Silver Creek, it feels right in a way that chasing outlaws stopped feeling a long time ago. Rebecca's heart thundered in her chest. What will you do? Griffin gazed out at the darkening landscape, his profile strong against the purple sky. Silver Creek needs a lawman who isn't in Harold Winters' pocket. Sheriff Mills is getting on in years, and he's hinted he'd welcome a successor with experience. He turned to face her, his expression earnest. I've lived my life on the move, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. I'm ready for something different, something permanent. The word permanent hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Rebecca found herself unable to look away from his gaze, which held questions he wasn't yet asking aloud. Griffin, she began, uncertain how to express the tangle of emotions in her heart. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. I know it's soon, Rebecca. I know you're still healing from losing Thomas. I don't want to rush you or pressure you in any way. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are deep and true, and they grow stronger every day. Rebecca felt tears gather in her eyes. I never expected to feel this way again, she admitted softly. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was focused only on surviving, on keeping Emma safe. And now, Griffin prompted gently when she fell silent. Rebecca looked out at Emma, who had caught a firefly and was watching it glow in her cupped hands with wonder. Now I find myself dreaming again, about the future, about possibilities I thought were lost forever. She turned back to Griffin, allowing him to see the depth of emotion in her eyes. You've given that back to me, Griffin. You've given me hope. Griffin raised her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her palm. Hope is a good place to start, he murmured. As summer gave way to autumn, Silver Creek's new school opened its doors. 8 children enrolled initially, including Emma, who proudly told anyone who would listen that her mother was the teacher. Rebecca threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, rediscovering her passion for education that had been dormant since leaving Kentucky. Griffin, true to his word, accepted the position of deputy sheriff with the understanding that he would transition to sheriff when Mills retired the following spring. He rented a small house near the center of town, close enough to the jail to respond quickly if needed, but also conveniently located just 2 streets away from Rebecca's cabin. Their courtship proceeded with a proper restraint that respected Rebecca's status as a widow and the watchful eyes of the small community. They attended church together on Sundays, with Emma between them. Griffin often joined them for supper, bringing small gifts: a book for Rebecca, a carved wooden horse for Emma, fresh vegetables from the Chinese gardener on the edge of town. In the evenings, after Emma was asleep, they would sit on the porch and talk for hours. Rebecca shared stories of her childhood in Kentucky, of her courtship with Thomas, of her dreams for Emma's future. Griffin spoke of his years as a ranger, of the beauty of the Texas Hill Country where he'd grown up, of his growing affection for Silver Creek and its people. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. On one such evening in late October, as a crisp chill settled over the landscape, Griffin reached for Rebecca's hand. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, he said, his voice unusually hesitant. Rebecca's heart quickened. Yes. Griffin took a deep breath. I've come to love Silver Creek, but this cabin is small for you and Emma, especially with winter coming on. My house in town has 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. He paused, then continued carefully. I was wondering if you might consider. That is, if it's not too soon. Rebecca, would you and Emma do me the honor of becoming my family? Rebecca's breath caught in her throat, though she had begun to hope for this moment. Hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way her private thoughts had not. Griffin, are you certain? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I come with responsibilities, with a past. I'm asking for all of you, he interrupted gently, past included. Emma is part of what made me fall in love with you, your devotion to her, your willingness to sacrifice everything for her well-being. He turned in his chair to face her fully. I love you, Rebecca Morgan. I want to build a life with you and Emma, if you'll have me. Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. For so long, she had carried her burdens alone, had fought desperately just to keep herself and Emma alive. The prospect of sharing that load, of having a partner to face life's challenges alongside her, was almost too much to comprehend. Yes, she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, yes, Griffin, we would be honored to become your family. The joy that illuminated his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. He knelt before her chair and took both her hands in his. "You've made me the happiest man in the Arizona Territory," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet charged with promise. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed as she returned the kiss, allowing herself to embrace fully the love that had grown between them. When they parted, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak with Emma," he said softly. "Ask for her blessing too." Rebecca smiled through her tears. "She adores you. I think her blessing is assured." The next morning, Griffin arrived at breakfast carrying a small wooden box. Emma greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, but quickly noticed his unusual solemnity. "Is something wrong, Mr. Stone?" she asked, her small face creasing with concern. Griffin shook his head, smiling at her. "Nothing's wrong, Miss Emma, but I do have something important to ask you." He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragement, then knelt to the child's level. "I've asked your mother if she would do me the honor of becoming my wife, and she has said yes." Emma's eyes widened. "Does that mean you would be my papa?" Griffin nodded, his expression serious. "If you would like that, yes. I would be your stepfather, and I would care for you and your mother for all the days of my life. But only if you agree." Emma considered this with the grave deliberation of a child making a momentous decision. "Would we live in your house in town?" "Yes," Griffin replied. "It has a room that could be just for you, with a window that gets the morning sun." "Would I still go to Mama's school?" "Of course. Your mother is an excellent teacher." Emma bit her lip, then asked the question that mattered most to her. "Would you love my mama and make her happy? She's been sad for a very long time." Griffin's eyes softened as he glanced at Rebecca, who was watching the exchange with tears glistening in her eyes. "I will do everything in my power to make your mother happy, Emma. I promise you that." Emma nodded decisively. "Then I think it would be very nice if you were my new papa." Griffin smiled and opened the wooden box he had brought. Inside was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. "This belonged to my mother," he explained, lifting it carefully. "I thought you might like to have it, as a token of our new family." Emma's eyes widened as Griffin fastened the locket around her neck. She touched it reverently, then threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered experimentally. Griffin's arms tightened around the child as emotion overwhelmed him. Over Emma's shoulder, his eyes met Rebecca's, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. The journey that had begun with an accusation of theft, with desperation and danger, had led them to this moment of profound connection and hope. Later that day, as they walked together through town, Rebecca on Griffin's arm and Emma skipping ahead, Rebecca realized that for the first time since Thomas's death, she was looking forward to the future rather than dreading it. The weight of fear and uncertainty that had pressed upon her for so long had lifted, replaced by a buoyant hope that made her steps lighter. The townsfolk they passed nodded in greeting, many offering congratulations on their engagement, which had spread through Silver Creek with the speed only possible in a small community. Even Harold Winters, standing in the doorway of his bakery, gave them a grudging nod. "Quite a change from when I first saw you in this street," Griffin observed quietly. Rebecca squeezed his arm. "You changed everything that day." "We changed things together," he corrected gently. "Your courage, your resilience, those were always there. I just helped clear the path a little." Rebecca smiled up at him, marveling at how this man who had faced down the most dangerous outlaws in the territory could be so humble about his impact on her life. "You freed us, Griffin. Not just from immediate danger, but from the prison of despair we were living in." Griffin stopped walking and turned to face her, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by. And you, Rebecca Morgan, freed me from a loneliness I had grown so accustomed to that I no longer recognized it for what it was. He touched her cheek gently. We saved each other. Emma came running back to them, her new locket bouncing against her chest. Mama, Papa, Mrs. Abernathy says she wants to make my dress for the wedding. Can she? Please. Griffin chuckled at the child's enthusiasm. That's for your mother to decide, little one. Rebecca nodded, smiling at her daughter's excitement. That would be lovely, Emma. Mrs. Abernathy is an excellent seamstress. As Emma darted off again to share this news with Mrs. Abernathy, who was watching from her porch with evident delight, Griffin offered Rebecca his arm once more. Shall we continue our walk, future Mrs. Stone? Rebecca took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beside her, a presence that promised security and companionship for all the days to come. Lead on, future husband. Together they walked down the main street of Silver Creek, no longer strangers in a hostile town, but respected members of a community that was, step by step, becoming home. The wedding took place on the first Sunday in December, after church services in the small white chapel that served Silver Creek's faithful. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the pews to capacity and spilling onto the steps outside. Rebecca wore a dress of deep blue silk that Mrs. Abernathy and several other women had worked on in secret, surprising her with it the day before the wedding. It was far finer than anything she had owned since coming west, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs that reminded her of happier days in Kentucky. Emma, resplendent in a new white dress with a blue sash that matched her mother's gown, walked ahead of Rebecca down the aisle, scattering wildflower petals that the women had carefully dried and preserved for the occasion. The silver locket gleamed at her throat, a tangible symbol of the new family being formed that day. Griffin waited at the altar beside Reverend Porter, his usual worn coat replaced by a new black suit ordered specially from Tucson. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, but it was the expression on his face as Rebecca walked toward him that transformed him most completely. The hardness that had been etched into his features by years of tracking outlaws across harsh landscapes melted away, replaced by a tender wonder that took Rebecca's breath away. Sheriff Mills, serving as Griffin's best man, beamed with paternal pride. In the months since Griffin had come to Silver Creek, the older man had come to regard his deputy as the son he'd never had, and his approval of the match was evident in his misty eyes. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Porter spoke of new beginnings, of the blessings that could arise from adversity, of the divine providence that had brought Griffin to Silver Creek on the very day Rebecca had needed him most. When it came time for the vows, Griffin took Rebecca's hands in his and spoke with quiet conviction. Rebecca, when I rode into Silver Creek that day, I was a man with a mission but no true purpose beyond it. You and Emma showed me what I had been missing: a home, a family, a reason to stop wandering and put down roots. His thumbs brushed gently over her knuckles. I promise to protect you and Emma with everything I am. I promise to be faithful and true, in good times and in hardship. I promise to walk beside you for all the days we're granted together on this earth. Rebecca blinked back tears as she responded. Griffin, you came into our lives when all seemed lost. You saw value in me when others saw only my desperation. You offered hope when I had none. Her voice strengthened as she continued. I promise to stand by you as your partner and your wife. I promise to make a home with you that will be a haven of peace and love. I promise to face whatever comes our way with the same courage and faith you have shown me. There was scarcely a dry eye in the chapel when Reverend Porter pronounced them husband and wife. As Griffin leaned down to kiss his bride, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the congregation, led by Emma's delighted voice calling, "Hooray for Mama and Papa!" The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in Silver Creek. Mrs. Henderson had brought her famous apple pies, the Chinese gardener had prepared savory dumplings, and even Harold Winters, in a gesture of reconciliation, had provided fresh bread and pastries from his bakery. As the sun set on their wedding day, casting long shadows across the main street, Griffin and Rebecca stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching Emma play with the other children in the last light of day. "Happy, Mrs. Stone?" Griffin asked, his arm around her waist. Rebecca leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "More than I ever thought possible again," she admitted. Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "There are good days ahead for all of us." As darkness fell and lanterns were lit throughout Silver Creek, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that he was right. The journey that had begun with an accusation of theft had led to redemption, to respect, to love. Her spirit, once imprisoned by grief and desperation, soared free at last, buoyed by the love of the man beside her and the promise of the future they would build together. In the years that followed, Silver Creek prospered and grew, as did the Stone family. Griffin proved to be as skilled a sheriff as he had been a ranger, bringing a steady justice to the town that earned him the respect of even the most hardened miners and cowboys. Rebecca's school flourished, eventually moving to a proper schoolhouse built with funds from the territorial government. Emma thrived under the loving guidance of her mother and stepfather, growing into a bright, confident young woman with her mother's determination and her stepfather's sense of justice. She was joined by a brother, Thomas Griffin Stone, born a year after the wedding, and later by a sister, Grace. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the desert night wrapped around their home like a velvet cloak, Rebecca and Griffin would sometimes sit on their porch and marvel at the path that had brought them together, a desperate act, a moment of kindness, a journey of danger and courage that had forged between them a bond stronger than either could have imagined. And in those moments, with her hand clasped firmly in his, Rebecca would offer a silent prayer of gratitude for the day a Texas Ranger had paid the price for a loaf of stolen bread and, in doing so, had freed not just her body but her spirit to love again.